I wanted to first describe some of the parameters we're using as we develop these exams. And some of this I alluded to at our prior session a couple of months ago, but we've actually refined this for ourselves, both at the board level and at the staff level, in trying to develop what we hope the exam will serve to perform, basically the functions that we see the exams performing. The first is we need the exam to be secure. And we'll come back to this a few times today, but that includes content, meaning that we've heard concerns from people like you representing organizations that have a stake in this, that if the content's not secure, that the exam itself could potentially be flawed. In addition, the exam environment itself, we really need to be careful that candidates aren't using prohibited resources. That would be obviously a device to be able to look up answers online, a colleague who could be assisting, et cetera. So we're going to have to make sure that we're surveying that environment to make sure that it's approaching the security that we might achieve in one of our exam centers. But that runs up against cultural acceptance, and that is the idea that most of the candidates sitting for this exam have not had extensive experience with remote proctoring, and that means that basically, are you in a secure environment that is your home or your office, but it's made secure by the use of a webcam and a microphone that basically observe behaviors during the exam, so that we're sure that, or we're confident that you weren't looking up the answers online, or, as I say, getting help. This is somewhat intrusive. In fact, it borders on offensive, and we need to be careful of that, because our goal really is ultimately to treat professionals as professionals. And unfortunately, when you set up a process like this, it makes it seem as though we don't trust people, and that's really not true. We would anticipate that the vast majority of candidates for our exams are highly professional and wouldn't even want to create the appearance that they were attempting to circumvent the process. But at the same time, in order to have a valid process at the end of the day, we need to make sure that that we have some basic level of security around what these exams are going to look like. And we're borrowing much of this from what higher education has done for years in online proctoring for midterms and final examinations, et cetera. We haven't yet decided whether we're going to use live proctors versus artificial intelligence. Both are commercially available. Both have their pros and cons. It actually, as it looks right now, we're likely going to use a hybrid of these two that would include both live proctors assisted by artificial intelligence in order to make the process more efficient and more standardized. So as yet, haven't quite nailed that down. As I said, pros and cons on both sides of that. In addition to the process being secure, we need to be fair and consistent. And the environment which we used to control, of course, at our exam centers or to some degree at Pearson VUE has to be free of noise and interruptions. And that responsibility will now fall to the candidates, meaning that the candidate himself or herself will be responsible for that environment to make sure that it is that they're alone, that it has no significant noise or interruptions that would create a problem either for taking the exam or for, again, that assessment of a secure environment. It has to be practical. So we have to look at costs, because ultimately these costs get passed along to our candidates and diplomates, and we want to do it as efficiently as we can. At the same time, we want it to be reliable and relatively simple in its implementation, and that would include both the IT platform itself, that is the test delivery, if you will, as well as the interface that the candidates are going to deliver, the interface the candidates are going to use to take the exam. We need to be error-free, and we have talked in the office and at the board level about the fact that 95% success might be fine for something where you're trying to teach, for example, a course or a CME product. That's not acceptable in a high-stakes environment such as board certification. We need to be confident that for our candidates' sake, that this process can be delivered with a high level of reliability and be free from errors, which means a lot of testing up front, which is part of the reason, in fact, probably the single biggest reason for the long interval between sort of the concept being developed and the implementation dates, which, as you know, are into the first half of 2021. And we're trying to optimize the candidate experience. So we want it to be somewhat flexible so that candidates can take breaks during the exam day to some degree. Perhaps the most important feature is that we want to be able to recover for disruptions in the IT connection. So if the Wi-Fi goes out temporarily or falters, connection speeds slow down, if we have power outages, et cetera, we need to be prepared to have recovery periods for that. And it lengthens the process overall, not inordinately, but the point is we can't assume that an individual's Wi-Fi connection and their power will be unperturbed during the course of the exam. So in fairness to the candidate whose power goes out, and you can imagine the anxiety that might produce, we want to be able to have recovery periods as much as we reasonably can and still maintain the integrity of the exam itself. Also, we'd like to be able to accommodate, obviously, for individuals with disabilities and for nursing mothers, so that the more flexible we can be in the exam environment, the better we're able to do that in this remote capacity. And lastly, and this one I just use as an opportunity to point out, these all overlap to one degree or another. They either represent trade-offs or actually opportunities to leverage one to improve the other. But ultimately, this has to be a valid process. This has to be credible to the public. And part of that rationale is that it needs to be indicative of the high level of achievement and accomplishment that our candidates, basically what they've gone through, what they've accomplished, and what they've succeeded in doing over years of training, including medical school and residency. So at the end of the day, we want to be able to produce a valid credential. And in order to do that, we need these other features that allow us to kind of stand up and say, yes, we're confident that this exam accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish and represents what we would like it to represent. And that is an extremely high level of success for the candidates. We get this question a lot, so I included on a slide, what did we learn from the American Board of Surgery exam in July? And basically, they admitted in public on one of their webinars that they had rushed the design and implementation phases. They decided in April to administer an exam in July, and when it was a very public failure that impacted hundreds of recent graduates of surgery residencies, they admitted that perhaps if they had gone through more rigorous testing up front of the system itself, they could have anticipated and mitigated some of those inadequacies of the delivery system. In addition, surgery had difficulties with security around personal information. And this was a big deal because some of its perception, almost certainly, and that is that individuals who feel that they were getting more sales calls or that unexpected emails or spam or whatever, they thought it might be related to this. And some of that almost certainly was true. But even if it weren't, you're concerned because, of course, that to some degree that personal information had been either used or leaked inadvertently by their partners in the test delivery platform. So we're conscious of both of these. We're actually not using, of course, the vendors that they used for that process. But as we go through our design, we are in some ways fortunate, and I don't mean this in any way as to denigrate what American Board of Surgery did. I thought they gave it a good try. They set a very high goal for themselves, a 3-month interval, hundreds of test takers, and in some ways it's commendable. They gave it, I think, a good shot, but that failure, of course, educated the rest of the boards to kind of say, you know what, don't rush this. And there are pitfalls that are really difficult to anticipate. And we're going through that now, which is, again, part of the reason we've decided to be a little more methodical. And unfortunately, what it means for our candidates is it won't be delivered until 2021. But at the same time, I think we have a higher level of confidence that we'll be able to deliver and execute with a high level of reliability. We're going to be running pilot exams for both the computer-based exams, and we'll be using actually a diagnostic radiology contingent, but it'll be the same platform that radiation oncology would use, and we'll be able to troubleshoot it in a real-life situation, that is with real candidates for board certification, and we'll be doing that in the early part of 2021, and again, trying to learn from that. But more importantly, for every candidate, there will be prep sessions, and that is the ability to log into the system, make sure that your hardware meshes with the software that we're going to be delivering, and more importantly, that you can navigate through the process without having to learn it the day of the exam. And our goal is to have as many opportunities as individuals might want in order to test out the processes themselves. And that is the technology, the security measures, the things we're going to have to do to make sure that it's a secure process. We'll have practice sessions for the individuals, and more importantly, as I said, I hope to make these unlimited so that if somebody wants to log in every 2 days in the weeks leading up to the exam, they can do so and be comfortable that, hey, my computer works. I'm comfortable with the things I have to do to navigate to the exam proper, and therefore make it about your knowledge and not about your ability to sort of learn to navigate through a system that you're unfamiliar with. So we're anticipating all of this, and we have, again, ample time to be able to test these platforms in order to allow the individuals to be comfortable on exam day that they indeed believe, yeah, it's not the process itself that's going to be the problem. The exam is intended to assess one's knowledge, not one's ability to navigate through the process. For the oral exam model, we had shared much of this back in July. We're going to use a combination of commercially available video conferencing, which thanks to COVID, I think most of us are way too familiar with. And that part should be relatively easy, but that'll be in parallel to an exam platform interface that the ABR is developing that will, as closely as possible, mimic what the oral exam looked like when it was an in-person exam. And of course, with the added convenience of no travel is needed, we don't have to worry about social distancing, et cetera, in order to do that. And this platform actually opens up some opportunities to do a better job and deliver this, again, in a way that is, I think, hopefully reduces anxiety for the test taker to some degree. Still stressful, but we're trying to mitigate that as much as we can for the individuals, and at the same time, basically complete, again, that task that gets us to the goal, and that is to contribute to a valid credential. We're going to have a navigator assigned to each candidate during the oral exam, so that if there's a problem with the IT side or the connection, or who's my next examiner, picture walking down an electronic hallway, whereas you would have been, of course, in a physical place in the past. And the navigator's job is to make sure that the candidate is guided along this path and is not, again, troubled by the interface and the environment in this remote exam process. But instead, as they sit down with the examiner, it's a chance, again, to demonstrate their knowledge and accomplishment as a result of their extensive training. We're going to have 2 simultaneous examiners. This is something we learned indirectly from American Board of Surgery. Again, now, just as a reminder, American Board of Surgery's oral exam pilot back in May and June, they ran 2 separate pilots, was arguably a success. They had no candidates who couldn't be accurately assessed. They had overwhelmingly good response of the candidates to the process itself. So we're learning from that. But one of the things that included was 2 examiners. And part of the reason for that is if one examiner drops off the connection, you've got a backup sitting right there ready to go. And it represents a significant effort on the part of our trustees to recruit additional examiners. But the upside is that for the candidate, that if there are disruptions in connectivity, that if it's at the ABR end, at least somebody drops off, you've got somebody there for a seamless transition, which again, I hope does not contribute to more anxiety than the individuals already are feeling during this process. As I say, 2 simultaneous examiners, one is active, the other is discreetly observing, but is ready to take over on a moment's notice if the first examiner can't be heard, or we all have this experience whether we're dealing with Zoom or WebEx or Teams, where there are times the connection is suboptimal, and this is where we would then go on to the second examiner, who is ready, sitting basically discreetly observing, ready to take over when needed. So we're going to start off by acknowledging that the security of these models is less than it is for the in-person models, and we're borrowing them from models used in higher education. The difference is this is a high-stakes environment compared to your organic chemistry final, for example, and we acknowledge that. And unfortunately, right now, this has not really been tested in a high-stakes environment, meaning there's nobody we can look to and say, what worked and what didn't work beyond, of course, the American Board of Surgery back in July. So, the whole concept really is in some ways so novel that it's difficult for us to adhere to best practice because no one's really established what best practice would look like. And we're just looking to higher education and then applying our own sense of, how secure should it be? What do we need to do to make sure that when we're done, that we have generated that product, that certification that is credible to the public and the patients that you're going to serve. We have focused repeatedly on candidate experience. When in doubt, we come back to that. What does it look like from the point of view of the candidate? We obviously have a huge improvement in candidate experience in that we've taken the travel part out of the equation. The rest of it we're still working on. And there are some technical requirements, including a broadband internet connection, which makes sense. And we're optimistic that what most people have in their homes is not going to be a problem. This does not require extensive bandwidth, but it does require relatively reliable at-home Wi-Fi connection. The device is likely, and we're just setting a minimum here, a laptop that's greater than or equal to 13 inches. And I say modern laptop, and roughly 5 years. If you bought one in the last 5 years, it's almost certainly going to have the technical specs. And we'll release more technical specifications as we get closer to exam day. But for now, just in very rough terms, it basically means that the individual has to have a computer, and that has to be equipped with a webcam and a microphone. And that is true, incidentally, whether you're dealing with the oral exam or the computer-based exam, because we need to be able to tell from the webcam that, again, that the individual isn't using a separate device to look up answers or get help, et cetera. And obviously, we'll make sure it's compatible with Mac operating system or with Windows.